Ladies and gentlemen, I can't believe I'm speaking to this man on a podcast. It is an honor, it is a privilege to have him on the show. Everybody, please welcome Dr. Jim Yong Kim. Yes! Dr. Kim, how are you?
I'm doing great, Eric. Thanks for having me on your show. I love your show.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll be very honest. I'm a little nervous about doing this. This may be the most intimidating conversation that I've ever done. And I've done, a lot of people, Avengers, whoever. You may be the most nerve-wracking.
Eric, the most intimidating thing I've ever done is sing karaoke with you in Korea, okay? So compared to that, this is nothing.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you taking time to be here. Before we just jump into it, I guess, where are you? How are you doing?
So I'm in Westchester County, New York, with my family. Haven't been traveling much. I'm usually on the road a lot. I'm doing a new business. I'm trying to build infrastructure, energy, transport, water and waste, information technology, digital infrastructure in developing countries. So it's not that different from what I was doing at the World Bank Group. That usually requires travel. We have to go and not only meet investors, but look at the various possibilities for investment. And we haven't been doing that, but boy, we've been doing a lot over Zoom. So it's been amazing how much we've been able to get done. But the other thing I've been doing is I've been really involved in the COVID response in the United States, especially different parts of the world as well, but been really focused on trying to do something about what has been just an absolutely disastrous response in the United States.
Well, thank you for doing what you do, first of all, because I think you are a leader, a thought leader, and a visionary in terms of responding and dealing with not only things such as COVID and viruses and infectious diseases, but also in helping the poorest of the poor and people who are most disenfranchised. So I'm really excited to dive into a lot of the work that you've been doing recently that you look forward to doing in the future. But before that, I think for a lot of people who may not be familiar with who you are, I don't want to go down the entire resume because there's literally so many things that you have done, that you have achieved, that you have accomplished. But, just to kind of briefly give it to our listeners, Dr. Kim, I look at your life, your resume, your plethora of accomplishments, and I feel like it's safe to say that you're a man of incredible ambition, right? For most people, becoming a doctor, that in and of itself is an accomplishment, and you do that for life. But the Dr. Kim method is become a doctor, an anthropologist, fight drug-resistant tuberculosis, HIV, in the poorest parts of the world, lead the world in global health policy, become the president of an Ivy League, become the leader of the World Bank, and now you're doing global finance while combating COVID. So, how do you unpack this? How do you get that energy? Where did this all start from? Where does the ambition come from? It's a huge question, but I think that's the only way to kind of kick this off.
I had a very wonderful parents. My mother is still alive. My father passed away. But, my father, I give him a lot of credit because he was a dentist, a very, very practical man. My mother was a philosopher. She studied, ITYD, the great Korean Neo-Confucian philosopher Taege. Remember, everybody in Korea will know Taegero is named after this man who was really a giant in the history of Confucian thought. So my mother studied those guys, did her master's degree at Union Theological Seminary in New York and studied with some of the great minds of the 1950s, Reinhold Niebuhr, Paul Tillich. So my mother was the person with big ideas, ideas about changing the world. She was right there in New York City in the 50s when all these ideas about racial equality, you remember Martin Luther King, he did his greatest work in the early 1960s. And so then in the 50s, that world was just roiling with ideas about racial equality, women's rights. And so she was right there. And so for a Korean woman, who was born in 1933 and went through the war, her exposure to the grandest, most inspiring ideas of that generation was just something that affected the entire family. And so, my father was a dentist. He was a great dentist. He had this opportunity to come to the United States and study. He met my mother actually in the United States through friends. And they got married in the United States. My older brother was born in the United States, and then they went back, and my sister and I were born in Korea. But, both of them were refugees. My father left North Korea at the age of 19 and never returned. So he still has, he died in 1987, very young, and had never had any contact with anyone in his immediate family after he left North Korea. So, my mother lost her mother during the war, and, was on a boat and went to Jeju Island to escape the invasion from the north of North Korean troops. So they had these lives, but were able to come to the United States, see something completely different. My mother had such an amazing intellectual experience. My father learned dentistry. So, I think that it comes from them. Just to have escaped, from my father to escape from North Korea and then gotten into dental school in Seoul, for my mother to have lost her own mother and then, been in this extraordinary intellectual environment in New York City, I think that sort of set the tone. Now, my brother and my sister are also very accomplished, but, something happened with me in the sense that I always try to take on, the next challenge. And every time I took on what I thought was, okay, this is what's going to occupy me for the rest of my life. This is what I'm going to do. I would jump into it, just put everything I had. And then once we started having success, I started thinking, okay, what's next? So I've always just kept saying, what's next? I never started off with some grand plan, an ambitious plan. I mean, I know a lot of people who do that, and that's great. It works for them. I want to be a senator. I want to be president of the United States. I want to be president of Korea. I want to, run a huge company. I never had that. What I started off with was, I want to do something that's meaningful, that really, gets at some of the most important core issues. I remember watching Martin Luther King speak on television, and my mother gave me his writings and said, "This is an important man. You should pay attention to." And so, having remembered that was my frame of reference. Martin Luther King, although he didn't finish the project as he would have liked, he really just completely changed the world in very profound ways. And so I thought, that's cool. So look, I played football, I played basketball, I love sports. I played golf, I did all these things. But the thing that really got me charged up was thinking that maybe I can do something like Martin Luther King did, tackle just some fundamental issue of human fairness, and then take it forward. Now, I've told this story a lot. It's a true story. After my first semester at Brown, I came back and my father picked me up at the airport. And as we were driving home, I mean, this was in Iowa, so we were on a country road. And he asked me, he said, "So what are you going to study?" I said, "Dad, I'm going to study philosophy and political science. And I think I want to become a leader of a political movement." He literally pulled the car over to the side of the road. Right? Now, back in those days, Eric, I didn't speak any Korean, right? But if I spoke Korean, he would have probably said, "Yeah, 이 새끼야." Or, what he said was, "Look, after you finish medical school, your residency, you can study anything you want, right? So get the skills." Because he would say things to us like, "Look, philosophy and political science, you think anyone is going to pay a Chinaman to listen to what their thoughts are on philosophy and political science?" And actually, back in the 70s, he was kind of right. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't open to us. And the thought of going to Wall Street, going into finance, I mean, literally one generation after mine, lots of people did it. But when I was there, it was like, ooh, you gotta be careful, man. You gotta get a degree that no one can take it away from you, right? A medical degree, law degree, something where you're a professional, so that no one can take that away from you, because they knew what it was like to have people take that away from them, right? So I got this incredibly practical streak from my father, and then an appreciation, really a humility and an awe in the face of great ideas and great thinkers. And so I've always tried to kind of bring those two together in my life. And this is key. I did not start off thinking about a position. I didn't start off thinking about money. I just thought, what are the most important, interesting problems that I can tackle? And, I don't know if I can make a difference, but I'm going to put everything I have into it. And then my own personality is such that when we would get to a point where we won, right? Yeah. After we won, I just kind of lost interest, in the sense that, now everyone else could jump in and do all the technical work and make sure that the whole thing went forward. But I felt like, okay, now that I know that I can do that, what about that? Let's see what we can do with something even bigger.
That's.
And then I've been fortunate, Eric. Things just have fallen into my lap. I mean, it's just, I was so lucky. I applied for an MD PhD program in medical anthropology at Harvard, and in my year, nobody else applied. so I got in, and then after that, I applied to the most difficult residency program to get into, and because they liked the fact that we were doing so many things in developing countries, I got in. Right, so just lucky stroke after lucky stroke. One of the luckiest things that happened was my good buddy, Dr. Jong-uk Lee, Jong-uk. He was like the only other Korean doing any global health stuff, right? And he happened to become the head of the tuberculosis department at WHO. And so he and I met. We became very, very good friends. And then I helped him run his campaign to be Director General of WHO. He had zero chance, by everyone's account, he had zero chance of winning the election. But we just went crazy and did all these tricky things. We didn't cheat. We didn't cheat, but he understood the system. Yeah. And we made the most out of the system. There was only 32 countries voting. Haiti was one of them. And of course, the president of Haiti was our good friend. Right. Grenada, a country of Grenada, was voting. And one of our good friends was the relative of the prime minister of Grenada. So we put all these things together, and he became Director General of the World Health Organization. So just lucky break after lucky break. Out of the blue, just totally out of the blue, the head of the search committee for Dartmouth College, where I was president, happened to be a medical doctor, happened to come and see me speak, and just put my name, in as a candidate. And I'm telling you what I'm trying to get across here is that everything I've done is so improbable and so lucky, right? So the guy who was the headhunter for the president of Dartmouth, because the chair of the committee, a medical doctor from Boston, put my name in, he had to come talk to me. Yeah. So he interviewed me for about 3 hours. He's still a very good friend, a wonderful man. And after the interview, he said, "Look, you have no chance of becoming president of our college, right? I think you're an interesting guy, but you have no chance of becoming president of Dartmouth. But, I have got to go through the steps, and so I'll present you." Right? And so he presented me, and then there was one guy there who was on the committee. He was a banker at Morgan Stanley, and he's still a very, very close friend of mine. He just said, "No, I don't throw him away. I want to meet him. I want to meet the guy." And they said, "Well, why? He's got none of the experience that you need to be president of university." And Brad said, "He's competitive, right? He's got it. He takes on big problems. He's competitive, and I think we need someone like that." And so, after that, I just read everything I could find about Dartmouth and found the most interesting things about its history, things that the search committee didn't know, right? So I was able to say, look, this is what the history of this place is, and if you want me to do that, I will.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got that job, and then from there, right? Tim Geithner, Secretary of the Treasury, is a Dartmouth graduate, right? And so, and I had worked with the Clintons, both President Clinton and Secretary Clinton, and Secretary Clinton and Tim Geithner both knew me, put my name up to be president of the World Bank, right? So all this to say, all of the positions I was in, totally accidental. The thing that's constant is that I've kept trying to take on the biggest challenges that I can possibly take on. And then, if I'm successful, I go on to the next thing.
Well, sir, to say that you've been overly successful, you've outperformed, you are in every way imaginable. But, I think so much of that comes because there's so much effort. To you, it's, yes, you could say I'm lucky, and it's a very, it's a very humbling way to say it. But one thing that as I'm listening to you, I guess what I'm trying to say and ask is, as a singer, I get a lot of questions of like, how did you go from becoming a political science international studies grad to becoming a K-pop star that, has
who was rejected from joining the a cappella groups
who could not get into the a cappella groups?
Blows me away. Okay, that just blows me away.
So how did that happen? And for me, it's always been, I try to take everything I can. I loved music, so I would pursue it, but I always had a constant of trying everything that I could and trying to be prepared for everything. But I feel like you, not one up, you like 10 up me in that, and being incredible and being able to do all that. But the question, I guess, is going from so many different role to role to role. I mean, they are all generally around global health initiatives and for the betterment of others. But I feel like they could also be distinctly, vastly different. Were you ever kind of scared or nervous or have a sense of imposter syndrome as you step into these grand roles?
No, all the time. All the time. I'm now at the point where if I don't have butterflies in my stomach, in tackling something important, I kind of feel like maybe it's not so important after all. Right? So. Yeah, I've always, and I think anyone who tells you, nah, it doesn't bother me at all, they're either lying or they don't understand what they're actually doing, right? So, the first time I was at a G20 leaders meeting or a G7 leaders meeting, and you're sitting there with President Obama and all the most powerful people in the world, it's like, whoa. But then, I did it for 7 years. So after the 7th year, you kind of feel like, oh, okay, I've done this before. I've seen this before. I know people. I mean, for the G20 leaders meetings, there was always somebody new coming along, and I was often found myself introducing people to each other. And so after you've had those experiences, what happens is you start with nervousness. You start with the imposter syndrome, but if you dig into it, if you really just put everything you have into it, you learn and you grow in the position, and you begin to feel like, okay, I can do this. I understand this. Now, for a lot of people, this is perfectly reasonable. Once they get into that position of comfort, they just keep going because that's it. Being the head of a big agency or being the head of an Ivy League school, that's a great job. But for me, every time it got comfortable, that's sort of when I started getting a little uncomfortable, right? Because the sense that I always had is, it's not going to be easy tackling the most important problems of the world. It's always going to be a little bit difficult. So if you're feeling too comfortable, you have to be careful. Now, my older brother, he's just everyone is his friend. He is a hilarious guy. He used to write jokes for his friends who are stand-up comedians, right? He's just the nicest guy in the world. He used to say about me, he said, Jim, if we're in some place and there are 3 doors and one of them is open, right? I'll always just walk through the door that's open. You, on the other hand, you put your head through the wall just in case that might be a better way to get to the other side, right? So that's been the difference between us. And I don't think I've tried to intentionally hurt myself, but I have tried to set high bars for tackling difficult problems, and also one of the things I found, I really admire people who are just have a military-like discipline. Boom, boom, boom. Get everything done. Everything is in order. Everything is set. I'm not so good at that. I respond much, much better when there is a huge, difficult, challenging problem in front of me, and I've got to run. Right. So that always has been the best way for me to organize my life and my time.
It's really kind of. I respect you in so many ways, and I don't want this to sound like I'm sucking up to you in any way, but I'm hearing what you're saying, and there's so many similarities in how we think that I'm just like, oh yeah, that's exactly how I think. People always say like, why are you doing this? I'm like, I don't know, like there is an easier way, but that's not, I don't think, the right way. That kind of thing. But I guess a personal question is, for me, having, I look back at my life or career, and I feel like I've been 150% go all the time. And I hit this point kind of right now where I'm in this slump of just, I'm exhausted. I feel like deadbeat in many ways. Did you ever have that period? When going through so many different positions, so many different challenges that you're trying to tackle, how do you keep that spark going? And did you ever have a moment where you kind of like fizzled out for a little bit?
Yeah, I think the moments when I fizzled out were, crazy enough, the moments when we had success. Right? So, just to give you an example, when I went to the World Health Organization, right at that moment, the moment that I arrived, there were 25 million people in Africa living with HIV. And the consensus at the time was it's impossible to treat those people with the drugs that we had, which were extremely effective. And so, literally 99.99% of the public health world was saying, not possible, we're just going to have to focus on prevention of new infections. The 25 million people, they're going to just have to die, right? And so I couldn't believe it. I thought I would say things like, and this is when, Eric, I felt like, okay, this is the most important issue of our time. I would say things like, okay, folks, if our generation lets 25 million people die in Africa, even though we have the medicines, just because we think it's too complicated, it's too difficult, we will forever be remembered as the generation that let Africa and African young people die, right? We will be known for that just as much as the Nazis are known for the Holocaust, right? And so, right at that moment, I was never more alive. I felt like my head was on fire because there's just so many things coming at us. But then over a 3-year period, we really did change the world. We changed the world from a place where they were saying it's impossible to one where we had 1 million people. We went from nobody to 1 million people on treatment, and everyone's idea of what was possible changed. And it was at that moment that I thought, okay, now I got to go on and do something else. I mean, it sounds crazy. I should have taken some victory laps. I should have taken time to enjoy that. But I just felt like, okay, that's the contribution that I usually try to make. The contribution of convincing people that something that they say is impossible is in fact possible. But once we've shown that it's possible, once everyone's convinced, right, that's when I sort of lose energy. So, it's a funny thing, but let me just say one thing, Eric, right? I'm amazed at what you've done. Right. So, and let me just say that I would give up half of my resume if I could sing like you. Okay? I would wipe it off if I could sing like you. And for you to have come not speaking much Korean, right? Having been rejected from your glee club in college, and then becoming the star that you are today, I think that's amazing, right? That's amazing. And now for you, it's what's next, right? And I don't know. I think that there's you could do just about anything, and you've got to find the thing that gets you excited.
Yeah.
And I, as I say, if we're alike, that's finding that thing is important.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. And I feel like this conversation right now is somewhat of a personal therapy session, but it's
No, I'm telling you, man, I think you're dope. I think you're dope.
Thank you so much.
I mean, you're a cultural icon figure in Korea, and you grew up in the United States, in Atlanta,
Yeah.
for Christ's sake, of all places, right?
Yeah.
And that's not an easy thing to do. I see the pressure that's on the Korean stars. It's hard.
Well, thank you. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, as much as I feel like I've tried to do a lot of interesting, fun things for me in my life, I think it's possible because there are people like yourself who paved the way in ways that we don't even realize until we kind of get to know your story and people around you. So, just as much, thank you for what you do, not just for Korean Americans, Asian Americans, but just for the world. It's incredible stuff. I guess, one question I have is from a more anthropological perspective, right? There's something about Korean culture and the people. Even if you look at like how well Korea's been exporting literally everything.
Oh yeah.
For a while. Is there something about the way you work and the way you drive your career and your life that is just innately Korean?
I'm an anthropologist of Korea. I did my dissertation fieldwork in Korea, and I just remember learning about so many different things. The things like, and I'll say it in English. That this guy is just so 지독해, right? He is so intense.
Right.
That when he sits on the lawn, the grass doesn't grow there anymore. Right? I'm sure you've heard that saying, right? So Koreans have that kind of intensity that is, I think it's very special. So for I think it was about it was 6 years that Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and I served together, right? And so we did something, I think, that I hope that it will last. We brought the World Bank and the United Nations together in a way that it never had been before. And so I got to spend a ton of time with the Secretary General. And this guy was just the most incredibly disciplined person I have ever met. I used to call him the superstar athlete of diplomacy, right? I mean, he met with everyone. He had patience for everyone. He went back and forth and talked to people to try to make things work out. And there was I felt like I recognized in him something just profoundly Korean, right? That he 착하고, right? 부지런하고. He was just so disciplined, so sincere, such a good man. That I felt so proud to be around him and to know that he was that leader. I tell you, I think that I wonder if the Korean educational system itself builds a kind of grit and determination that you can't do in any other way. In the way that Korean kids are taught how to study, how to organize themselves, just to survive. I think those skills are then translated into all these other things that they do. When I hear about the boy bands and the girl bands, etc., they work so hard. They just work harder than anyone else, and it's that work that has led them to be such stars. So I think there's something about the school system. I think there's something about the fact that we're literally one generation away from just utter devastation. At the World Bank Group, the vice president of East Asia put a report on my desk that was from 1962. In 1962, I was 3 years old. What they wrote about Korea was that this country is so poor that it doesn't qualify for a World Bank loan, because they thought we can give them a loan, but there's no way they're going to pay it back. It's a mostly rural country. The literacy rate was less than 20%, right? The percentage of people who'd gone to college at that time was just tiny. So coming from there and having the sense of just how hard it's going to be to get there. And some people will say, the countries that grow rice because of the stoop labor, they know what it means to put a lot of hard work in and not see the result until much later. I don't know if that's true, but I think the combination of the history, is there something about national character? Gosh, who knows? But I sure see lots and lots of Koreans who just throw themselves at something, just throw themselves at difficult tasks and keep going at it. Now in psychology they have a word for it. They call it grit.
Right.
And the great psychologists like Angela Duckworth wrote a whole book on grit. Angela's actually Chinese American. Her husband's name is Duckworth, but she wrote a wonderful book called Grit. And she believes, and I think most people do, that grit is something you can actually teach. So it's not like people in Korea are born with it, but having grit, I think, is now firmly part of how people judge each other. If you don't have grit, if you don't have the ability to stick to something, I think in Korea people look down on you.
Yeah. I could see that.
Yeah.
No, I think it definitely directly affects, whatever success you want to measure in whatever field you're doing. Kind of segue off of the education thing. A lot of our listeners are college students, some high school students, many who have just recently graduated. And I think for those who are recently graduating, who are looking at graduation, they're entering the workforce at a very interesting time. Right. We have COVID going on, just a global economy that we don't really know what's going to happen. Everybody's kind of on edge. All while I feel like a lot of people think what we learn in our university system, particularly now, doesn't exactly line up. It doesn't sync up with what we're doing in the real world. Yeah. As someone who is incredibly overqualified and has so many degrees, what do you have to say to Gen Z or millennials who are pursuing education and trying to figure out their paths in life?
Yeah. So there were a couple of children, friends of mine, who were graduating, and they asked me to write something to them about what I would tell an 18-year-old going out into the world for the first time. And so I thought a lot about it. I thought, well, what would I tell them? So the most important thing is that you've got to get into the mode of being a lifelong learner, right? So it's not so much what you learn, is that the habits that you pick up. And when I was at Dartmouth, I talked a lot about habits of mind. And if you Google habits of mind, there's like a whole world that thinks about, well, what are the habits of mind that we want to cultivate in all young people? For me, the most important thing is that I have been willing to take on new things, even at every age in my life. And right now, the new thing I'm taking on is project finance, modeling the value of a company, looking at how a particular piece of infrastructure will lead to economic growth. These are all things that are totally new to me, but I'm learning them, and often I feel like I'm a complete a baby learning a new language, right? I didn't learn Korean again. I spoke it until I was 5, completely forgot it. And then at the age of 24, went back to Korea to learn Korean so that I could do my dissertation fieldwork, right? And so, looking like a Korean and being there, that experience, Eric, you had it yourself, that the experience of becoming a baby again, and then scratching your way up so that you learn enough of the language so that you can function as an adult. That I had that experience at 24. I did it again at 28 when I went to Peru and learned Spanish. Right, I learned another language at the age of 28. Learned higher ed administration when I went to Dartmouth. Learned economic development. So you have to be prepared to continue to do that. So what you need is some basic foundations, and then the ability to dive into something new and then pick around it, look through it, and figure out a way to continue to learn. You're going to have to continue to learn for the rest of your life.
All right. So just always being curious, always learning.
Yeah.
That's
always being curious, but then also being systematic about it and saying, okay, what do I need to master in order to be able to, in order to be able to make a contribution in this way? And I think this idea of 10,000 hours, that mastery
Right.
requires 10,000 hours, I think that works out pretty well.
Okay. Great. Thank you for that. You know, you mentioned you've been learning how to look at global infrastructure and where to put funds, and private equity essentially is what you're doing. Um, at the culmination of having achieved so many things, having played so many important roles, what was it about your current role that kind of drew you in, and what was your thinking in approaching this new position?
The great one of the most powerful experiences for me was going to China.
Hmm.
I grew up in a world where people would say, "Hey, you better eat that. Think of all the starving children in China."
Mm,
And indeed, there were a lot of starving children in China. And as recently as 1990, just 30 years ago, 70% of people in China were living in extreme poverty.
mm,
That's less than $1.95 a day. And extreme poverty is just a horrendous kind of situation. 70%
mm,
were living in extreme poverty. And in 30 years, they went from 70% living in extreme poverty to now almost nobody
mhm,
is living in extreme poverty. 800 million people have been lifted out of extreme poverty in
mhm,
China. And so, you can criticize China for lots of things, just as you can criticize any country. But what they did to lift their people out of poverty was just unbelievably moving
mhm,
to me.
mhm,
And so, if you step back and say, okay, so for people like me, people who grew up, who were born in Korea, in a place that was war torn, thought of as a basket case by the World Bank, lucky enough to have two parents who are college educated, but living in a context in which the vast majority, again in Korea, probably 80-90% of the people were living in extreme poverty in the late 1950s. For a person like that, my commitment should be that everyone on earth has the same opportunity that I
mhm,
did to get an education, to get a good job, to have a family. And so, if you look at what China did, the thing that's probably most important was they invested in the kind of infrastructure that would allow everyone to participate in the global
mhm.
economy. So they invented new ways of engaging in the global economy. Alibaba, Tencent, the
Right.
e-commerce that really has become huge in China. Not originally maybe a Chinese idea, but they turned it into something that is bringing literally everybody, even in the poorest provinces, into the global economy. I realized early on in my tenure that that's what was
Mm,
necessary. Yes, we need good health care, and I knew I would always work on that.
mhm,
Yes, we need good education, and I knew I would always work on it. But the thing that was going to hold everybody back was a lack of infrastructure,
mhm,
especially electricity, transport, IT, water and waste. Those are the things that were going to hold people
mhm,
back. And when I was at the World Bank, what I realized was that there's just no way that the traditional aid infrastructure, whether it's foreign assistance from rich countries or but huge banks like the World Bank, there was just no way that there was enough money in that
mhm,
system to really build infrastructure everywhere. So I had decided early on that someday I was going to do this. Someday I was going to go out and try to build a private sector group that would invest in infrastructure in developing countries and give people a
mm,
chance. I'd love to be able to do something in Africa, for example, that will double and triple the amount of electricity
mhm.
that Africa has. All of sub-Saharan Africa has about as much electricity as Belgium, as one
Wow.
country in Europe, and they simply cannot lift themselves out of poverty if they don't have
Mhm,
electricity. So, to me, this is really the next
mhm.
big step. I
Yeah.
mean, if we don't figure out a way to bring in private sector investment in infrastructure in developing countries, they don't really have a
Yeah.
chance. Aid is not going to solve the problem at this point.
Right. I mean, that's fascinating. And I would maybe at a later date, maybe just not on a podcast, just pick your brain on that, because that's something that was really interesting to me growing up. I spent a lot of time in Latin America. I spent some time in Africa or India. You know, I know that what I contributed probably didn't change the lives of people, but that was kind of what drove me to study international studies and political science. And um, that's fascinating stuff. But as you just recently joined this new role, COVID happens. COVID explodes across the world, and it's almost ironic in the sense that you have kind of been pulled back into this world of global health and policy and infrastructure in that sense. And for our listeners, they may not be aware of how much you have been writing and being on TV and talking about the importance of building the right policies to approach this. But I think we're on the same page in saying that in the US particularly, it has been handled horrifically. And I read all your articles, and it was, outlining a lot of the places in Asia that have done it so well, particularly in Korea. But I think a lot of people, myself included, I think I don't know how you feel, we've been like exhausted from COVID this past year, just feeling helpless, feeling powerless, not knowing what to do. So I guess the question that I have, so we're not harping on the traumatization and the disappointment that we've had to deal with, is where do we go from here? How do we build from here in a way that is meaningful, that is effective, and how do we contribute to that? I think that's something that I wanted to ask you.
Well, there's lots of things that we could do, and the question is which countries will step up and do the things that are necessary to stop something like this from happening again. And so, Korea got it right. I think the MERS outbreak in 2014 just scared the hell out of everybody. So they were prepared. Korea was prepared. And I just still have enormous respect. Early on in March of this year, I spoke with some leaders at the Korean Centers for Disease Control. I knew immediately that they were playing a different ballgame than the rest of us. They talked about the virus as if it were a person. They started sussing out its personality, where it liked to hide, how it liked to move. And still today, I think the Koreans have the best data of anyone about how this spreads. There was just recently a story in the Los Angeles Times. A Korean group found that there was a girl who got infected, and they had no idea where she got infected because there were no other cases in her town. And it turns out that she went into a restaurant. She was only in there for 5 minutes, and she was infected by someone 20 feet away from her, because that person 20 feet away from her coughed or sneezed and was sitting right underneath a fan that literally blew the virus, infected her, and then that's how she got COVID, right? So nobody else knows this because nobody else has this kind of data, certainly not in the Western world. In China, they have data like this because nobody is able to follow every single infection to know exactly where they came from, right? You have to have the thing under control so that a single case sends a signal, and then you can go around and find out exactly how that case happened. So basically, that kind of system is going to be required in every single country in the world. Now, is it doable? Absolutely. But it's not doable if you start too late, if you're in denial, if you don't put enough money into it. You've got to, you've really got to prepare ahead of time. So building the kinds of systems that Korea had is really, really critical. But there's something else. I mean, the COVID is almost like a solidarity test. The more literary types are calling it fellow feeling. But we used to call it human solidarity, human compassion, a sense that you are part of the culture. I think also, Koreans showed just how much solidarity they are capable of feeling during the Asian financial crisis in the late 1990s. You'll remember when that happened, they took their own silver and gold and deposited it, in downtown Seoul, I think in front of the Ministry of Finance, and they raised more than $2 billion just by donating their own silver and gold. Right? And I remember hearing about that and thinking, oh my God, what other place would ever do something like that, right? So a country that's capable of those kinds of acts of human solidarity those are the countries that are going to do best in the face of a virus like COVID. And so, you wear a mask not for yourself, but for others. In the United States, now we're really putting the message out there that if you wear a mask, it protects you too, not just others, right? Because that's the message we have to send, right? But still in the United States, my right to be stupid and not wear a mask is more important than this fellow feeling, the sense that I owe it to the other members of my society to not infect them. So the science has to be respected. We've got to build the kind of ground game, the kind of very good sort of epidemiological shoe leather detective work that the great countries have. But also, we just have to ask fundamental questions about, so what's the nature of human solidarity in our country, right? And I think what the U.S. has said is, no, my right to be just as stupid as I want to be is more important than protecting, my fellow human beings in my country.
Right. No, I laugh because it just seems so, I've been in Korea for the majority of this year, and I get back to the States and I'm like, how is this possible? Like it is right. Jarring. It is completely jarring.
Absolutely.
And so it's been a shock. It's been to see people who are so lax about it is also very shocking. But I guess it kind of speaks also to it's just become so politicized in many ways. Unfortunately, so where it's global health. Our health should be just health. It shouldn't be politicized one way or another, but unfortunately it has. But because it has been that way, I guess looking at this new administration, the Biden administration that's going to be coming in, have you seen anything there that is optimistic or, have you been speaking with them at all in any way to kind of inform them or to consult them in potential next steps?
No, Eric, I wasn't involved in the campaign, and so I know so many of the people who are taking, certainly in the health arena, but Janet Yellen is a person. She's a friend. We both went to Brown. We went to a lot of these G20 meetings together when she was at the Fed. And so. So I know a lot of these people, and I think just from the top to the bottom, I'm extremely encouraged by the people who've been chosen. I mean, in the health arena, Vivek Murthy trained in the same program that I did in Boston. Rochelle Walensky trained at the other hospital, but it is someone who I've met and who my closest friends know extremely well, and she's going to be terrific at Centers for Disease Control. So I think things will get better, and certainly from a leadership perspective. I think the Biden administration will say all the right things. They'll have all the right goals, both from the perspective of the epidemic, and I think also in terms of investing so that it doesn't happen again. But the divide that you talked about, Eric, 8 million people voted for Biden, but over 70 million people voted for President Trump as well. So he certainly tapped into something that's very real and very powerful. And so, I think that the Biden administration has to think about, well, what does that mean? And how can we address the kind of angst and concern that the people who voted for President Trump are feeling? Now, it's only by doing that, I think, that we'll be able to build the kind of sense of solidarity that will protect us from epidemics in the future, and that will also get us on the right path. I mean, I'm very worried about the status of education in this country. We're falling behind in terms of math scores, in terms of all of the standardized testing. There's not a lot of opportunity. There's not the same kind of opportunity today that there was before for children to do better than their parents. And so President Trump tapped into something very deep. And, this administration, rather than just saying, okay, we win, we're going to go in our direction, they're going to have to really take that seriously. I'm really interested in seeing where that's going to go.
Yeah. I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic, and hopefully we can get back to some sense of normalcy in the next year or so. And we just kind of, I guess, hopefully, like you were speaking about, that solidarity, I hope that we can encourage people to kind of come together in one way or another. That's probably the biggest task that we have as people, as citizens of the world. We've always had that, but I feel like it's more dire now than it's ever been. So that's something that my heart is always on and praying for. But I feel like, we've been talking for about almost an hour now, and I know you're a busy guy. We want to let you go. You got people to save, things to do. But I don't want to end on like this note of having talked about so much heavy stuff. So we got to lighten it up just a little bit. Now, I've never played golf, right? But I know, and I've heard this from many, many people, that you are a standout, amazing athlete and golfer. So for our listeners, Jim has won club championships. He's gone undefeated in golf trips against pros and some incredible players.
No.
So this all comes back to it. Why are you so good at everything? How did you fit golf into your life, and how did you become so good? Like, do you have a daily routine? You said you don't live this very regimented life, but the only way that it makes sense to me that you have done so much is you have a great regimen, you practice, you do all these things. Tell us about this.
So Eric, I am competitive,
Yeah.
right? And I think it goes back, my father was competitive. He was an athlete too. He was competitive, and I remember when people said racist things to him, he fought back. He would not take crap from anybody, right? And so, when we came to Dallas, right, to Dallas, Texas is where we landed, when I was 5 years old. And at first I didn't speak any English. So I remember going into the house of a friend of mine, and I think I was 6 at the time, and he brought me in. We were having something to drink, and his older brother came home, and when he saw me, he yelled and screamed at me to get out of his house, right? Because of the way I looked, right? And I remember, playing football and basketball. There was one time we went to play basketball in a small little town, Washington, Iowa. And I say it now because I want people to remember that that's what they were like. And on our team, on the starting lineup, there was me and there was an African-American guy. And we were actually very close friends, Gary Monroe. And when we came out on the floor, the people on the stand started screaming and yelling and spitting. Wow. You chink, go back to where you came from, right? And so my father, not taking shit as he did, he went to talk to the athletic director and said, that was too much, right? And the athletic director said, "Oh, you're just being too sensitive," right? They didn't mean anything by it, right? So I had these experiences from when I was young, and so I was never competitive about making money or hurting anybody else. But in the context of a game, I still have this competitive drive. The other thing is, it's just like the rest of my life. Unless I have something that I'm trying to do, in a contest or something, it's hard for me to get motivated. So. A phenomenon. I don't even know if you may be too young for that, but among the Korean Americans on the East Coast, volleyball tournaments were a huge thing.
Oh, were they? Right? I had no idea.
They were a huge thing. It was the time, like twice a year, where the entire Korean American community of everybody on the East Coast would get together, and there would be dance and there would be dinners, and it was focused around volleyball tournaments. So. At the time I was, in college and in medical school, I was single. And so, that was the prime time to meet members of whatever sex you were interested in, at any given time. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to get good at volleyball. So I'd never played it before. It before. There's no volleyball in Iowa. And I just started going crazy trying to get better at volleyball. And eventually, I got good enough so that I played on the Brown University team. Right, so I played intercollegiate volleyball, and I would like not be so diligent, but about 2 months before a volleyball tournament, I would be doing jump squats. I'd go crazy because I knew I was going to be on this stage and that it was going to be competitive. And I would get ready for it. So now the only thing I have is golf, right? The only thing I used to play basketball, football. I can't play those really anymore. So golf is what I have. And so everything I do is focused around, getting in better shape to be better at
Mm,
golf. And golf now, it used to be, a bunch of, big bellied guys smoking cigarettes play golf. Not
right.
anymore. It's a totally different game now. And so I do enjoy playing. If I didn't have it, I think I'd lose motivation to stay in any kind of shape at all.
So our listeners, I talked about it before. Jim has this movie. It's called Bending the Arc. It's on Netflix, and it shows the entire process of Jim and his team going down to Haiti and all over the world, actually, and fighting, doing what people were saying was impossible in the medical field. And so we have to talk about this. So Jim, like, I know we've talked about so much about your life and all that stuff, but what kind of brought us together originally for this podcast is talk about the movie as well. So could you tell us like a little bit of insight into the movie, what it's about, and whatever you want to share about it?
Yeah. So, Eric, it gets to a lot of the themes that we've already spoken about. And when I tell people we found all these people suffering from drug-resistant tuberculosis, and people from the World Health Organization, this was before I got involved in the WHO, were telling us, no, you got to let them die. No, don't treat them. You got to let them die. And when we were trying to argue that you can't let 25 million people in Africa die, when we have treatments that you take once in the morning and once in the evening, there were people who were furious at us and saying, what are you talking about? There's no way you can treat these people in Africa. And so what happened was a couple of a bunch of, well, there's really one, Corey Stern, a brilliant documentary filmmaker, just went through the archives of the Harvard Medical School library, went through our own archives, looked for every little piece of information, and documented exactly how that happened. Right? And so it's called Bending the Arc, and it's from a line that that Martin Luther King used to say all the time. It was actually first said by a pastor in the 1940s, I think. But the line is, the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice, right? But the title is Bending the Arc because what Martin Luther King showed us, even though he said the arc of history is long and it bends toward justice, it didn't bend toward justice on its own. Martin Luther King gave his life grabbing and trying to bend the arc toward justice. I mean, it doesn't happen on its own. And so, the whole movie is about how we tried to bend the arc of history toward justice. And I have to say, they did a great job. There's a lot of very revealing scenes in there. There's one in which they really played a trick on me, right? It's not a trick. They showed me.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, right. There was this young gentleman that I had treated. Probably they shot the scene in 2015 that I had treated 10 years before, right? And we have footage of me treating this guy, and he looked like he was going to die. He looked like he was literally skin and bones. He looked like he was just on death's door. And then they brought me. This was at the annual meeting of the World Bank and the IMF. I mean, all of the leading lights in the finance world were in Peru at that time. They went and they found this kid in Peru and shot film of him. And as I was sitting there trying to get ready for this meeting, they showed me the footage, and I just started weeping. It was just to see. Here I was in this position, being the president of the World Bank, and this guy who was living in a hovel and surely would have died if we hadn't intervened. Here he was looking, strong. He'd become an accountant. He talked about why everyone's life matters. And so they set it up too, so that they thought I was going to cry, and they set it up so that they would capture it. So that's how hard they worked on it. So it's on Netflix. It'd be great. Take a look. It's something that you want to watch with people you love and people you care about.
Absolutely. I mean, I got through it so quickly, and I found it to be uplifting in many ways. One thing that I was just like also wowed about is that you guys had the foresight to shoot stuff from the very beginning. You had all that on video. And I was like, it's incredible that they have all this footage from 30 years back almost from then. And to just see the progress of the organization and the lives that it's changed and the amazing work that you guys have done. It was kind of like that warm feeling where like, there are good people in the world. We just need to we just need to be reminded and encouraged of that. So if you're listening to this podcast, please check it out.
And the crazy thing is that just as the public health world had given up on drug-resistant tuberculosis in Peru and Haiti, just as they'd given up on HIV treatment in Africa, they gave up on doing the full public health response in the United States. That's why we've got involved. And our team now, the Partners in Health team, working in the United States is huge. State after state after state has come to us and said, how do we work in an environment like this? And they've never worked in a kind of out of control health environment like this before. And that's all we do. That's all we did at Partners Health. We worked at places where diseases were running out of control, and yet we still were able to mount a response. And so that's why we're working in the United States. It tells you something, that an organization that's known for its work in the poorest countries in the world now has probably its largest footprint, certainly economically, in the United States.
I mean, there's so much that we have to fix, that we have to heal, that we have to develop and grow. But it's reassuring to see that there are great minds like yourself kind of leading the charge. So thank you for doing what you do.
All right, but let's get back to you.
Why? There's nothing to talk about, Jim.
All right. Eric, look, you are a uniquely gifted communicator.
Thank you.
Right? And you have a way of putting people at ease. You have a way of getting people to say things that they wouldn't normally say. I've seen a lot of your interviews because I know that every time an English-speaking celebrity would come to Korea, you would interview them. You have a very special talent. And let me just say that there's nothing that I have ever done, any project, any task I've ever taken on, that hasn't required fantastic communication. I've worked with some great communication specialists, but you have a very special gift. And so all the people who are listening to the podcast, I think we should think together about the next great thing that Eric should do. You should keep singing. You should keep doing your podcast. You should keep doing all the things that you're doing, but you have a very special talent at communicating, and you can't let that wither.
Well, thank you. That's very encouraging. And if you think of anything, please let me know.
Well, we can do that in the next podcast, right?
Absolutely.
We can get a group of your friends and we can talk about what should Eric do next.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
And it could be, hey Eric, we think you're dope.
That, you know what? I don't mind that. I don't hate the idea. We should do a special.
That'd be great. I'd be happy to be on it.
We'll definitely try to schedule that. But you've been so great.
Well, and we can get Mickey. We can get Mickey Lee too. That Mickey will. Let's do it. That'd be great.
That would be so much fun. I mean, you've been so overly gracious with your time. I know you are so busy. So thank you so much for making the time to speak with me and to all the listeners, to all the young people who, I think a lot of people might have really taken away a lot from this conversation. So thank you for the time. I think 2 last questions. First, what do your kids think of you, and do they know how cool you are?
Absolutely not. My kids think I'm a doofus. My kids think I'm technologically handicapped. Right? The only time my kids sort of think I'm cool. So, a person I've gotten to know fairly well is Bono. So when Bono had his concert in Washington, D.C., I brought my older son and 4 of his friends backstage to meet Bono, right? So my older son, Thomas, thought I was cool for about 15 minutes on that day. Right? And then when I forget where we were, but with the whole family, we were at the G20 meeting in Hamburg, right? And so, my little one, he's 11 now. We were meeting Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron. We were meeting all these guys, and he didn't think that they were too cool. But then we went to the concert that they were having, and he met Pharrell Williams, right? And he thought, oh, okay, Dad, right? That was my 15 minutes of coolness with my younger son. So 15 minutes I'll settle for. That's about all I get.
Well, you know what? If it's any consolation, I think you're cool. I think you're pretty dope. Any final words of encouragement or anything you want to say to our listeners? I know you've shared so much, but just to kind of wrap everything together, I think what people need these days are just words of encouragement.
So, I say this a lot when I'm in Asia. I've said it to the Chinese leaders. It's become more true with COVID. Asia has to lead, and it has to lead in a way that's different than the way that Europe and the United States has led in the past, right? And so, all of the social justice talk that was just so powerful with the killing of George Floyd, et cetera, right? I mean, this was so powerful, and it caught us all up in a moment, and we thought, okay, this is important enough, even with COVID, for me to get out and protest on the streets, right? What does that mean? Well, part of it is that it is connected to the history of the West's relationship with Africa and with people of color all over the world, right? And so, facing what my friend Brian Stevenson, who they made a movie about him, Just Mercy, and he's a very good friend, and he started something called the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama. And what he said was, all this stuff, Black Lives Matter, it's connected to slavery. We've never gotten past the legacy of slavery in this country, and I think he's right. So as Asia now comes into a position where culturally, economically, socially, and now with COVID, Korea, China, Japan are going to be so much further ahead economically. Even Malaysia, Philippines, all of Asia is going to be ahead. As it moves, as the region moves ahead, there's got to be a fundamental question of will we lead differently than the West has led, right? Now, look, I'm not saying that Western leaders today have to take responsibility for the slavery of more than 100 years ago, but this notion that there is a West and it is going to convey civilization, it's going to convey all the sort of better things in life to the rest of the world. The time for that kind of attitude is over, and so as Asian countries and as people like us, Eric, start moving into the lead, as we're part of cultures and societies, speak languages, of a region that is moving so quickly, we have to decide: are we going to just revel in our wealth and enjoy it and say, look at us, we've done so well, or are we going to say, especially as Koreans? We started, when I was born in 1959, Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world, and it was thought to be hopeless. So my life has spanned that kind of historical breadth. Now, what does that mean? I think it has to mean for me that my commitment has to be, okay, so we're going to try to find ways of respectfully, with great compassion, making it possible for every other person on earth to go down that same path, so that truly what will happen is that if you work hard, if you take advantage of the things that are put in front of you, you can succeed. You can join the global economy. You can have a family. You can have a house. You can be educated. If we step forward and say our leadership's going to be different, we are not going to go around talking about our superiority and conferring our civilization on others. What we're going to do is humbly, respectfully make it possible for everyone to go down this path. The Neo-Confucian philosophers were not only talking about hierarchy, they were talking about fundamental issues of justice. And those fundamental issues of justice, I think, are eternal.
All right. Man, that was very well said, very deep. But, like you're saying, I guess I didn't really put it together, but this cultural shift from, the West, everything being so good from the West. But right now we look at it, East Asia, Asia in general is leading in so many ways. So I guess as Asian Americans, as Asians, what can we do to use that for good, essentially? Yeah.
Yeah. And, and for our fellow Koreans, I just say, man, fighting. It's amazing. Giseng Chung, I every time I get on a treadmill, it's, the reason I keep going is because I love watching these Netflix, Korean dramas, Record of Youth, I'm sure they're all your friends, right? Eric, I keep thinking all these people must be your friends, and I'm such a huge fan.
Well, next time I see anyone, I'll be like, Dr. Kim is a big fan. And I'll point him to this podcast.
Well, they have no idea who I am, but Bae Suji, right? I just watched her. The themes are so complex. They're so well done. I'm amazed at just the quality of the cultural production coming out of Korea.
Absolutely.
It's amazing.
Well, Dr. Kim, thank you again for your time. You've been so generous with your time. So many insights, so many words of encouragement, new ways to think about things and approach life. So I think this hour or so of conversation will have people walking away with so much. So thank you for your time and your wisdom. And please stay safe.
Thank you, Eric. Let's do it again.
Absolutely. Right. Hit me up whenever. We can go karaoke.
Eric Nam, we think you're dope. That should be a session.
We'll put that together.
We'll vote on it.
Thanks so much. Have a good one.
Thanks, Eric.
Bye.
Good to see you. Bye-bye.
Hey guys, did you guys like that video? Then make sure you guys subscribe to Dive Studios YouTube channel and put your notifications on, because we got a lot more great content coming your way. Look at this video. See? Wow. And this is great too. Enjoy.